Welcome to another episode of Artist Spotlight, the podcast. I'm your host, Mitch Stringer. This episode, as always, brought to you by your friends at the Maryland Photography Alliance, where you can check out what they have going on, and all the various camera clubs that work with the Alliance can enjoy upcoming events and contests and just good information. So I encourage you to take a look and then refer back, because if you come and look at the site, probably a week later, there's new and updated information that can really benefit you and help you improve your photography, help you meet like-minded individuals, and get out there and do what we all enjoy with our cameras. So with that, I want to let you know this episode, we have Kevin Jairaj, who's a Texas-based photographer, multifaceted guy, all sorts of background, and just a super impressive guy that I've known of for many years because we've worked for some of the same entities, but really not had a chance to talk. And so I'm looking forward to this, and I'm sure that I'm going to enjoy it, and I think you will as well. So with that, all the way from Texas, Kevin Jairaj, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thanks, Mitch. And it's great to be on with you. Like you mentioned, we've known each other forever, online or that way. And it's great to actually talk to you in person and get to know you a bit.
You know, it's funny, for all the negatives that you can talk about social media, and there's plenty of negatives, some of the positives, and there are many of those, is that you can meet people and you can share, good, positive information. And, you feel like you know people, even though maybe you've never met, or you've not actually, spoken with voice, you've spoken with text or DM or whatever. And so, maybe a good place to start is there, and just say, for you as a photographer, how do you see social media in terms of either broadening opportunities or limiting opportunities or increasing exposure of work? What's your take on that?
That's a great question, and it's good and bad. I recently spoke at the University of Oklahoma they asked me to speak to their business students, incoming freshmen. And that's one thing we brought up, because it's social media these days. It's really can make or break people. I mean, and I tell these students now, be careful what you post on social media, because people are looking. So it's not always positive, and you don't want to have anything bad. You don't want to have anything controversial, for sure. And then it's a great way to showcase your work. Like I've hired a lot of photographers based upon their work, which I found them on social media, which I wouldn't have found them before. And so there's things like that, like I said, positives and negatives. So I always try to keep mine. If you ever look at my social media, which I'm at Kevin Jairaj and everything, it's mainly positive. There's no negative. There's nothing political. There's nothing controversial. It's mainly about the work or what's going on in my personal life, good or bad, but I try to share as much as I can where I feel comfortable doing it. But like I said, it's pretty, you just got to be careful what you post. And like I said, I try to make mine positive and keep it that way. And hopefully people see that.
Yeah, it's, I think that I'm going to say especially young people, and I say that not from an ageism perspective, but from the perspective of, as you are younger, you don't know what you don't know. And through, learning and living and making mistakes, hopefully not huge ones, and recovering them, you get to these moments of, I don't want to do that again. And so I think you have so many, especially younger people, who they're just younger. They haven't had quite as much experience. Maybe they haven't made as many mistakes. And so it's such an unfiltered, immediate environment. As soon as you type whatever and hit send or upload or publish, it's published, and it is, you can take it back, but once it hits social media with screen grabs and everything else, in a sense it lives forever. And so I too have spoken with people, young photographers, and just people in general, and I let them know, just it's okay to think what you want, and it's always okay to revisit what you think and get more information and form your opinions, hopefully in an educated way. But, when you express them, especially things that could be very perceived as negative, it really can put you in a box that's hard to get out of sometimes.
For sure. Totally agree.
Yeah. Now, it's interesting. You mentioned your social media and where people can check out your work, etc. You do something that is a way that I actually describe my own life. And I say to people that I feel like I live a photographic life. And by that, I mean, as I grew into photography, even if I didn't have my camera or even my phone, which ultimately became a camera for, or is a camera for so many of us, I kind of see the world in compositions. Just walking around, I can see a person sitting on a bench and I can think, oh, that would be a shot. Look at the light. Look at the, whatever it is. Looking at your social media and all the different genres that you clearly, from looking at the site, excel at, uh, you know, maybe you can talk about how is it that you are doing so many different types of photography, frankly, so well, and not really specialized in just one.
That's a funny thing you say that because I've always, growing up, you've always been told you're jack of all trades, master of none, you know what I mean? And with me, it's like I started out pretty much doing, fashion and portrait work, which branched into wedding work, which I still, love photographing couples to this day. I love doing fashion portraits to this day. I love doing, now it transfers to athlete portraits. I love doing all that stuff. And then, so I think for me, it was just a love of what I wanted to do and then to challenge myself to do different things. I'll give you a perfect example. I have not done a safari yet. I saw you've done a safari. I'm jealous as all get out because that's one of my next things I want to do. That and maybe some astrophotography stuff with stars. I haven't done that yet. But yeah, now, it's into the sports. I've done sports for, 10, 15 years, forget the number now. But I've kind of grown in that and kind of built that and tried to get as good as I possibly can and learn as much as I can every day. That's one thing. Another thing for young folks that's a good topic is to never stop learning. I mean, especially with technology we've got going on these days. I learn something new every day. I'm sure you do too. It's like times are changing every day. Technology is changing every day. Cameras are changing. It's like you have to keep up with it to get better and to improve. And then, like you mentioned, compositions. It's just something that part comes naturally. People always ask me, they're like, Kevin, you teach all these classes, you teach students, aren't you afraid they're going to copy you and steal your work? And I'm like, you know what? I part of me, I always like to give back. I always like to share. And the thing about photographers that make us unique is that we all have our own eye, right? We see things our own way. You could put five photographers in a room with the same subject and same background, the same everything, and they're going to have five different compositions, right? Five different shots. And so I'm not ever worried about that. I just want to, help as much as I can. I had a lot of photographers help me on my way up. And so I always like to give back. And I always tell people if you have any questions, feel free to DM me, feel free to email me. I try to answer as much as I can. It's harder these days with a lot more going on, but I definitely try to give back and help that way. So
I talk to a lot of up and coming photographers, and they do ask questions like, what do you suggest? How did you grow your career? How did you get different assignments? How did you build different relationships with whether it's wire services or publishing companies or on and on? And I'm always happy to share that information. And a lot of them come from either art schools or majoring in photography, et cetera. And one thing that I think is in a sense unique, and I'm guessing highly beneficial, is you graduate from University of Oklahoma with a degree in business administration, so you've got this formal business training background, but then you obviously have this artistic capability. Some part you're kind of born with and grow up almost subconsciously developing, and then you learn from people, etc. There's always the rub where they say it's very difficult for someone who's extremely creative also to have a business mind, and
correct.
sometimes vice versa. But by virtue of your formal education and then your occupation now, clearly you have both and have been able to marry both of those. How have you seen kind of the benefits of that business training, in your work as a creative?
Yeah, and actually that's a great point because you hear the term starving artists, and there's so many artists these days that are so creative, so talented, but they don't know how to run a business. They don't know how to make money at what they do. But their stuff is amazing. And that's great to a point. And I see so much, even on like we're talking social media, they show it off on Instagram. Yeah, but how are they monetizing it? What are they doing for their career? And they're not. And for me, yeah, it was a little backwards. I have, BBA in business administration, minor in marketing. I started out right out of college. I was in the corporate world for a while. I was in the corporate world for 5, 6 years and just kind of photographed on the side. It wasn't a full-time gig for me until people were like, hey, you might want to think about doing it. You're actually pretty good at it. And I kind of got burned out of the corporate life of traveling every week. And, I had an account in Minnesota where it was like wonderful in the summer, but in the winter, it's like really cold and I have to go there every week. So I kind of saved up some money and decided, what? I'm going to be in charge of if I make it or not. I'm going to start KJ Images Photography. And at that time, I was specializing in a lot of portraits and getting into weddings. And I'm my own boss. And I was just like, you know what? It's up to me if I make it or not. And so that's how I did. And yeah, I used a lot of my business background to kind of market to the clients in the area and to do different things, with vendors. I did a lot of vendor marketing and things like that. And it blew up and it took off. And so that's kind of how I started my business. I've used it to this day on dealing with contracts with corporate clients and all the things we have to do in that realm. So yeah, that definitely helped. It's a little bit of a benefit for me for sure.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that would seem to be, just so great because the business piece, it's hard. If
Mhm.
creativity comes natural, and maybe someone has family members who are, creative, or even if it's a mom, a dad, an uncle, an aunt who has a camera, and that's where someone got the first idea. You can somewhat pick that up, but the business savvy, just fundamental, foundational business concepts, etc., that's not something that most photographers have formal training, in. So clearly that's a
Yeah, and
benefit.
to that point, pricing is probably the number one thing. The photographers don't know how to price themselves or price their work, especially for jobs. So that's one thing I would encourage all photographers to do is to study pricing or ask other photographers around in the area what's similar, so you're not undercutting yourself.
Well, and that brings up an interesting point. You have scenarios where in really all lines of business where people feel like, I really want the job, I really need the job, I'm willing to work for less. And, not only do they undermine their own ability to earn a living or earn what they should earn, but they ultimately undermine all the other competitors who are working in that space. And in
Right.
the short run, somebody might think, well, I'll undercut them, but at least I'll get the business. That will come back to bite you
It
eventually,
will.
because you won't be the only one who does that. And then it becomes, as the expression goes, a race to the bottom.
Correct.
I think that in the last, 5 to 7 years, from a photography standpoint, we've seen a little bit of a race to the bottom, and going back to the business knowledge, there's that expression supply and demand. And so in the world we live in, I would argue that there is more demand for visual imagery than ever. But the value, the perceived value, and what's paid for that imagery that's needed more than ever has arguably never been lower. And do you have at least a perspective on why maybe supply and demand doesn't seem to apply?
I think there's so much out there now, especially with like back to social media and even with your phones. It's just like there's so much there that clients stuff they used to not be able to get readily. Now you've got so many people providing that everywhere. And so it's naturally going to come down. So how do you get away? What do you do? So you have to be unique. You have to try to come from a different angle. You have to offer some sort of, whether it be product or offer, I hate to say just prints, but not even prints, but just product or services that other photographers or other your competition cannot offer or will not offer. And so you just have to find a way to differentiate yourself to make yourself stand out. I'll give you just a fun example of a friend of mine who's a wedding photographer. I tell this story a lot, but he'd been trying to get into celebrity weddings, big celebrity weddings. And there's a huge celebrity wedding planner in New York. And he'd been trying for months to get a meeting with her, and she wouldn't take the meeting. He tried calling, he tried emails. So what he did, he actually bought a pair of Manolo Blahnik shoes. And for the women out there, these are very nice shoes that a lot of, women wear around to weddings even. And he actually mailed her one shoe to the office and said, "Hey, if you take a meeting with me, I will give you the other shoe too." She never did take the meeting, but I think it's hilarious. Like, well, you know what? And it worked for he does weird things like that for other wedding planners where it worked and other vendors where he was able to get their attention. And then once you get the attention, it's up to you to make it work and to show what you can offer. But just stay, be memorable for the right reasons. Is what I always tell my students, be memorable, make them remember you for something. When people are applying for jobs, how many resumes do you put out? Or how many resumes do they see? They see hundreds and hundreds. What makes you stand out? Same thing when people are, being with the college football playoff now, I hire about 30 photographers a year to cover all the playoff games, and I have to hire some new photographers. So I have people reach out to me literally every week. Hey, I want to be on your team. I want to be on your team. Well, okay, well, why? What can you do that my team doesn't do already? What makes you stand out? So I need to know it's just not, oh, look at my Instagram. Look at this. Look at that. I want to make sure you stand out and you have something to offer that will make me want to hire you. And to be unique, well, I'll remember you, so things like that.
Well, it's funny. The Manolo Blahnik, that is a heck of a promo item. Uh, I think a fruit basket might be less expensive.
I'm telling, well, the value of the weddings that this planner does, it's a
It's
drop in
well
the
worth
bucket.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's well worth it. So, at this point in your career, you've photographed World Series and Olympics and Super Bowls, and it's all, it's incredibly impressive and representative of the quality of the work you do. How did it all get started? I mean, do you remember kind of early days, the first time that you picked up a camera with, a desire to make pictures or even a clue about a camera? I mean, was it when you were like a little kid, or where did that first start?
No, I think I used to goof around as a kid, playing around with the, disposable cameras, film cameras here and there, but nothing serious. Then after college, it was right before the digital takeover, I call it. It's like when digital first came into effect, I kind of was like, oh, this is kind of neat. Let me look at this and play around. And that's when, I had my corporate job and I just started messing around and I started to self teach myself what to do and how to do it. And I did it by trial and error. Obviously it's like, oh, I would take like pictures and I'd be like, oh, these look great. Don't look good. Why? Why does it not look good? Why do these look good? And that made me teach myself about lighting and direction of light and quality of light and then posing and how to get that to look good and all sorts of things. And so I kind of just taught myself and I really seriously then got into it probably after the digital age started. So and like I said, I had my corporate job, and then that's when I started to get into it, where I bought my first real Canon digital camera, which I think was a Canon 5D or 10D. I can't remember at the,
Yeah.
the time, but and I bought my first 70-200 because I was like, this is my first real lens, and 24-70 because I was told those are wedding lenses and portrait lenses if you want to get started. So that's what I did, and I kind of taught myself from there, and then it just kind of grew.
I can remember, gosh, so many years ago. I was probably 13, 14, and I can't remember the occasion, some occasion. And I asked if I could get a camera as a gift. And it was a Nikon film camera that came with, of course, the nifty 50. And I want to say my grandfather got it from me. I think it was like 54th Street Photo in New York
Mhm.
City or something like that. And so, there I was with a 50. And, as you know, and many listening know, 50 is roughly what the eye sees, the perspective of what, our eyes see looking around. And I use that, I would go to, being in Baltimore, I would go to Baltimore Orioles games and I'd bring it. And I remember a few years later, there was a company called Vivitar, and I'm
Mhm.
dating myself, but Vivitar
Flashes.
was like a third party brand, and I bought a pre-owned. I was working mowing lawns, and I brought a pre-owned 75 to 300 lens for that Nikon, and I went to the Oriole game, and it blew my mind because now, through that zoom, I'm on the field. I'm not just shooting with a 50, but I am substantially closer, obviously, and when you have bright sunshine and you have a 300 millimeter lens and, your seats are halfway decent at a ball game. And back in the day where you could kind of walk down pregame closer to the
Right.
field, now different stadiums are a little more strict than others. But, do you remember when you first started with a zoom? Did it in some respects open your eyes for you the way it did to me about the new reach and the new capabilities, or was it not quite, some big thing as it was for me?
Yeah, probably the 7200 zoom for me, because I remember doing portrait sessions. I was like you too. I think I didn't have many lenses to start. So when I started having that and then to shoot at 2.8, I compressed the background, and I'm like, wow, this is eye-opening. It's just like we didn't have portrait mode back then, on your phone.
Right.
It was like this you have to actually do it. And so yeah, when I shoot at 2.8 at 7200, I was shooting, at 170 to 200, somewhere around there, and then the portrait just stuck out, and the background was beautiful. I was just like, oh my gosh, what is this? And so yeah, that's probably how I got started with it.
Yeah, I think when I started purchasing faster lenses, and instead of having a maximum aperture of maybe four, or 5.6, and now it's at 2.8, and having that that bokeh and that blur in the background, at first I really didn't even know what in the world it was. I was like, what's going on? That whole
Right.
background is blurred, but it looks really cool. And I was living in Los Angeles, and just a fan at the time, and I had a longer lens, and I was shooting in the outfield, shooting outfielders. And I just remember how an elevated perspective, shooting down on the outfielder, waiting for one of the guys to dive to make a play with that with now green background
Hmm.
because he's diving,
Right.
and it got more and more gently blurred the further away it got from the outfielder. And I mean, I just about heard angels sing. I didn't even know how it was happening, but I thought that's amazing. And I think that actually it brings up a couple things. So you have achieved something that's very noteworthy, being a Canon explorer of light, and using Canon. And I have previously shot Canon for many, many years, and they really reserve that distinction for people who have really distinguished themselves in the field. So no small accomplishment at all. Um, I think that the average photographer, and our listeners range from amateur photographers to serious amateurs to working professionals. It's really the gamut. But I think a lot of times amateur photographers don't necessarily understand fully the difference between what you and I might call a fast lens, like a 2.8, or a 5.6 or a 6.3, and why is that 2.8 so much more expensive than the 6.3? If they're both the same focal length, why would I pay more for a faster lens? So maybe we could kind of take just a step back for a second, and give your thoughts on, if you're explaining to a person, not that they should or shouldn't buy one versus the other, but just giving a snapshot of the difference between shooting, say, a 300 and a 300 kind of what you can achieve as a photographer.
Sure. The main thing there is, and I like to explain it to students or folks like you mentioned, just trying to get into learning how to shoot, whether it be sports or portraits or whatnot, is the amount of light you let in. I mean, and especially a great example is I'll have parents come to me and they're trying to photograph their kids in the gym and it's dark, a high school gym. It's not much good light. And they're like, why are my photos all blurry? And well, you're shooting at a 5.6 lens and you can't really get that shutter speed up. You want to get your shutter speed. I say minimum 1,000 if possible, 1,000th of a second. And the more light you let in with a 2.8 lens or even a 1.2 lens, the easier it is to get that shutter speed up, and it allows more light in. And there you go. You can freeze the action, and it's very difficult to do. Those lenses, they're great if you're outdoors in the middle of the day, you're shooting a safari like we mentioned, or you're shooting at a zoo, or even a daytime game. It's perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with it. In fact, I would love to use lighter lenses if I'm shooting in bright sunshine, because then I don't have to have the big heavy lenses on me to give wear and tear on my body. But for the most part, you're looking at nighttime shooting for me is where, or indoors. If you want to shoot indoors, it's definitely better to have that fast glass. That, and they're just sharper. It's just made better. Obviously, there's a price. The price is a little more, but they're way sharper in my opinion. And combine that with the new camera bodies, it's insane what you can do, and how sharp those cameras and lenses are. Now you have eye focus where it follows the eyes, and it's amazing, the technology. And that's like kind of brings us back to where we talked before about keeping up with technology. I mean, we didn't have that a few years ago, and now look, we're actually letting the camera focus on eyes now. And then just we're working on our composition while it controls the focus, which is just insane.
Yeah, you really can have as much control as you want to, but you can also kind of manage what you need to deal with. And if you really only want to focus on composition, you can. Or if you only want to focus on composition and your f-stop, you can, and then let everything else kind of adjust, accordingly. It was probably only about, I don't know, 6, 7 years ago that I started really making more use of auto ISO,
Hmm.
especially, when you're shooting football, let's say, and the players running from shade to sun,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
it wouldn't be practical to switch ISO manually in an instant. It just wouldn't be a practical thing to do.
Right. No, I totally agree. That and aperture priority Canon has. So when you have those cloudy, sunny days, or I did a baseball game the other day and they actually opened the roof in Texas and they never do that. And so, you had half shade, half sun, and I'm like, whoa, this is new for me here. And so,
Yeah,
yeah, you're having to adjust on the fly because the batter's in the shade and the fielders are in the sunshine. So what happens there? And you have a split second to get what you need
yeah.
when the ball's hit out to the outfield.
So, as you are transitioning from the corporate world into photography, and it's becoming more serious,
Mhm.
you know, I guess a couple questions that are related. And one is, number one, where there are certain photographers, either historical or that were still working or still are working, that you read about or looked at their images, and either for inspiration or ideas about composition and angles. And then were there some actual photographers who somewhat mentored you, or that were kind of go-to resources for you along the way?
Good question. So as for actual photographers that I studied, there wasn't any. I kind of looked through a lot of magazines. It's kind of, I get published for wedding stuff, but I was a big sports fan growing up, and that's what kind of got me into sports. So I was looking at the sports photography magazines. I look at ESPN magazine. Sports Illustrated was big back then. Just all the different newspapers and magazines, and kind of look at the photography that stood out and impressed me, and just kind of like, oh, that's kind of neat, and so that's kind of what I looked. As for mentoring myself, probably Bob Rosado was probably my main mentor when he brought me into US Press Wire, which became USA Today Images and, Imagine Now. I learned a lot from him. I probably bugged him so much with different questions and ideas and what we could or could not do. And he was a staffer for Sports Illustrated for many years. And so we kind of had a lot of discussions. And probably I'd say my mentor in a lot of stuff, he taught me about how I staff a football game. It's kind of what I use for my national championship these days. So it's pretty much a lot of his stuff that he taught me. So yeah.
Yeah, Bob was a great resource for me as well. I remember, early days, he and I would get on the phone, not a lot, but maybe a couple times, and just kind of look at a game that was shot and the images from a game. And, we'd look at them, he'd say, that one I really like. That one should be, part of your portfolio when you're
Hmm.
showing your work to other people. We would look at others, and, what was going on before this, and, what was the f-stop on this. And we talked about, when is it a time to maybe shoot f8 if you are,
Hmm.
behind the defense at the goal line, and you really want a much wider swath of focus, whereas
Hmm.
you'd be at 2.8 other times to isolate
Right.
the player. And but no, he was a wonderful resource, certainly. I remember as a kid getting, for, I want to say, a birthday, a subscription to Sports Illustrated. And
Mm.
at that point, it was a weekly magazine.
Right.
And I remember, just, I mean, as the expression goes, waiting by the mailbox
Right.
for that issue, and not only to see the cover, but to see, ultimately leading off
Hmm.
became not
Yeah.
only great imagery, but as a photographer, I feel very fortunate to have had about a half dozen photos over my career in leading off.
Right.
And, when you'd open it and you'd have either, a page or a double truck, which, for those
Hmm.
who are unfamiliar, that's a double page of your picture. If you didn't know it was coming and you opened SI and there was your image, I mean, that was no small deal.
No, it's a cool feeling. In fact, I have my first one framed somewhere. Online.
Yeah, it's just, that's kind of a shining moment, let alone if you got a cover or something
Right.
like that. But yeah, really, really something else, for sure. So when people say to you, Kevin, what do you do for a living, and you're in an elevator, or you just get, introduced to somebody, how do you describe it? Because you're a photographer, but you are a photographer of so many different genres. What's your, as they say, the elevator speech that you give in response?
It depends who they are. I mean, if I know they're don't care about sports at all, I'll just say I'm a photographer or portrait fashion photographer. If I know they're into sports and I'm a pro sports photographer, so it just depends on who they are. If I don't know who they are, I'll just say, probably just photographer if they ask me, and then we kind of go into detail after that. The cool thing about it is now is like, with all the different genres, I have something in common with most people. It'll be celebrities and acting, and in my job as a director of photography for a trading card company, I come in contact with a lot of celebrities and actors, not just athletes now. So we have a lot of stuff in common with that as well. So sometimes I'll try to line up shoots for myself. They're like, hey, this would be a cool person to photograph down the road for something and whatnot. But yeah, so that's pretty much how I'd answer it.
You bring up trading cards, and you being the director of photography for Leaf, it brings me back to my origins in photography. Somebody said to me once in an interview, what piqued your interest in photography? And I can say unequivocally, it was the 1976 set of Topps baseball cards.
Nice. Mine's 84 Donruss.
Okay. Okay. And for me, the reason is that in 1975, it's funny how when you're a little kid, 1 year can make a big difference, even though it's just a year. So I didn't collect cards much in 75, and the cards in 1975 had a multicolored border that even as a little kid, I thought was a little distracting, and it had the facsimile autograph on it.
Yep.
In 76, they were very clean. I mean, the top 85% of the card was just the picture. And then at the bottom, it would have the team name and the player and the position, but it was so clean. And I would not only look at the photo, but I would look at the back, and I would look at the guy's birthday. And, I wanted to see what players had the same birthday as Frank Tanana, for those of you following him. And so Ed Armbrister on the Reds as well, from the 1976 set. But it's funny because the card business has gone through such an evolution, very much so. When I was a kid and moving through collecting cards very much had a heyday, and Upper Deck came out, and I think, and I want to naturally ask your opinion, changed the game in terms of image quality in card stock, and then arguably Upper Deck ruined the card business through a lot of very well publicized things that were going on. Fast forward to now, and really post COVID, in a way, COVID reignited the interest, love, focus on sports cards. And so, with that as the backdrop, I guess, what was your history growing up with cards, and kind of how you see things now and going forward?
So this is kind of funny, but I actually was a card hobby dealer with my cousin. They have card shows. You're familiar with card shows now. They had card shows back then in the late 80s, early 90s.
Oh, yeah.
And so we would set up, we were like 10, 12 years old. We set up, and all the big dealers would be like, look at these little kids here set up selling their cards. But it was like $30 to buy a table for a weekend. So we did it, and we sold our cards. And that's kind of how our stuff. So I've been in the industry over 40 something years. So I've seen the ups and downs, the ebbs and flows, everything you can think of in this industry. And it's funny because history does repeat itself, like you're mentioning. And COVID, as you mentioned, kind of brought everything back. No one had anything to do during COVID, right? So people that collect shoes, people that collect cards, everyone just was sitting at home going, wow, I have this, I have that. And it kind of brought the whole nostalgia back. Now, my history with the cards is I was out of the industry probably. I collected personally. And when we have other time, I'll tell you about the horror stories of how I sold all these cards that would be worth millions today. And so I could be retired on a private island somewhere, but that's for another day. But anyway, so I got asked in 2016, I think, by a company called Panini to come over there if I'd be interested in doing being a photo editor with them. And I think it was 2016, and I had not been in the industry for a while. When the 90s hit, probably 94, 95, I kind of stopped for a while. I kind of got burned out of that. And like you mentioned, everything was overproduced. It was just like nothing was of value, and so I kind of lost interest. And then I was like, well, I don't want to take a corporate job again, but then they're like, oh, hey, you can be real flexible with your photography, everything you do, the national championship you do. And so I was like, you know what? Okay, I'll give it a shot. And I love sports cards. I love trading cards. I love the industry. I love what it's about. And so I did that for a while. Then, I came over to Leaf when they asked me to be their director of photography a few years ago. I couldn't turn it down. I was like, man, this is a great company, and we're putting out, they've got some really cool ideas, and I was all about that. Innovation is what we're doing over there at Leaf now. And so, and we have got our celebrity products are next to no one can top our celebrity products. We have a product called Pop Century we just put out a couple of weeks ago, which we're signing A-list actors and actresses. I mean, we got Margot Robbie, we've got Al Pacino, Clint Eastwood. I mean, you name it, we've got it. And so we're working deals with these people, and we're putting them on cards, and they're huge collectors that are just flocking to this stuff. And so, and yeah, and we still do a lot of sports as well. And so it's kind of a unique company in that we don't have a lot of licenses, so we kind of sign the athletes to themselves to deals, and I work with the athletes on accepting the deals and the photos and making sure they're happy with all the photos we use and things like that. So that's kind of how it started for me. So it's been a lifelong thing, and I have the flexibility with Leaf to kind of do the national championship, work with the CFP, work with USA Today Imagine, work with Canon. So it's really kind of a cool thing. But yeah, I'm a little busy these days.
Yeah, it's like the best of all worlds, and
Yeah,
it's so nice. It's so nice to not have to give up things, or at least across the board give up a bunch of things. There's always scheduling, and that's what
sure.
life's about, is making adjustments. But to be able to retain much of the things you really enjoy and getting into a new venture, with shooting sports, you're on a sideline or an end line or at a track or whatever it is, and those performing, they're only mildly aware of photographers, if at all. They're there to perform whatever sport they are. Now, contrast that with model photography, and it's very different, because
Sure.
it is, it's either one-on-one, or maybe if there's a makeup artist,
Mhm.
there's a little bit of a support staff, but still there's a real obvious awareness between the subject and the photographer. And so much of I think getting the best out of that interaction is building trust with the
Right.
subject. Not
Right.
everybody's a professional model, some are, to varying degrees. So, in the work that you've done, when you've shot people from a modeling perspective, what sort of tools of the trade do you use to build confidence and build a rapport, so that they feel more comfortable, and collectively you get the absolute best result that you can?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. And it's actually something I think I'm pretty good at, and I try to be. And what it is like, say I have it's just use an athlete instead of a model, or it could be a model as well. I try to find something about them before I photograph them that we might have in common. Whether it be where we grew up, whether school we went to, whether it be someone we know, just so you can break the ice when they first walk in. Okay, so once they first walk in, I'll be like, I'll give a good example. When I photographed Alex Morgan, who's on the U.S. soccer team for the Olympic portraits back in 2012 or 14, I can't remember. I knew nothing of her, and I knew I was kind of like, wow, she's really getting really popular, and I didn't know anything about her, so I knew that she just did a ESPN the magazine shoot where she did body paint.
Mm-hmm.
And so she'd been doing photo shoots all day. And so I was like, okay, well, what can I do to make her laugh or kind of get her comfortable? So she walks in, I go, and she just comes in her sweatshirt and all that stuff. And I'm like, what, no body paint today? And she kind of grinned and looked at me and she goes, well, if you got 9 hours. I was like, so that kind of broke the ice. But something like that, or like I said, I'll find a hometown or something we have in common and kind of explain to them or talk to them and then kind of get, lets their guard down a little. But that's very important. You mentioned trust. Trust is very huge. And another thing I will stress to photographers to establish trust is that, think about this. When we have a photo shoot, we know in our minds what we're doing, right? We have a vision, we have a creative idea, we have an end product in mind. That subject you're photographing has no idea what you're doing. Okay. So you're telling them to do these things and they're just like, okay, why am I doing this? What is this like? So then what I do is I will actually show them a picture or two after we take it, give them an example. Here's what I'm trying to do. Look how it's going to look. And they're like, oh, I get it. So then you get their buy-in. Once you get their buy-in, then they're willing to work with you. Great, perfect example of this is NBA rookie photo shoot I did one year, where in my particular area, it's nothing but black fabric. And for some reason, they stuck me in the corner of a gym where I had a basketball goal, but it's not a 10-foot goal. It was like a 12-foot goal way up there. And so I have these guys just doing these drills, and I was like, man, it'd be cool to get one with you looking like you're dunking up there. And they kind of took a look at me and are looking up there like, like, no, I'm not dunking on anything. That's like 12 foot up, and I can't get up there for half these guys. And I'm like, well, hey, what if here's me doing it. So I actually took a picture of me doing it while we were waiting for them to come in. And it looks like you're dunking, but you're not dunking because, it's black background. So I showed them, and I go, look, if I can do this, you can. And they're like, all right. So they did it, and I showed them a couple pictures, and like, okay, I get it. Then they were willing to all get out like it was a slam dunk contest, even though they're not even near the rim. So things like that just kind of get their buy-in, and that helps a lot. And like you said, like you mentioned, gaining trust is huge.
I know I've had situations where I have a shoot that is scheduled with media relations, and in one case, I'm thinking of it's a magazine cover shoot, and I'm supposed to shoot these three outfielders. They were the new outfield, so I'm supposed to photograph the three of them together before practice starts. Well, due to this, that, and the other, before practice starts becomes after practice is over. So
Right.
now I'm sitting in a dugout
Yeah.
for over 3 hours while practice is going on. And you're just sitting there, and I mean that's all you can do. And had another one where I'm supposed to photograph a manager, and really gruff guy. And I said, Tom, I'll give you a little sense of the story that this is going to be the cover of, so you have some context for it. And he says, I don't care.
Right.
Let's just get the picture over. And so, my all of that, the setup to you is, I imagine in your career you've had situations where someone says, all right, Kevin, you've got 5 minutes.
Oh yeah, that
And you don't know the subject from anybody. And from the time they walk in till the time they walk out, you've got 5 minutes. And generally the subject knows that this guy's got 5 minutes with me, and then I can go home or
right.
eat or whatever. So how do you condense that, building a rapport, and again getting an image that the entity that's hiring you wants to get, when clearly you have very minimal time? How do you scale that down into literally 300 seconds?
Yeah, that's where being a wedding photographer actually helped me because, things at weddings don't exactly go as planned a lot of times. So you kind of have to go to roll with the flow. And yeah, so you just kind of go with it, and where I always have a plan A, B, C, D is what I call it. And so if something doesn't work out, where do I go? If the sun's coming out when I don't want it to be out, where do I go? Things like that. If it's windy, if it's raining, where do you go? So I always try to plan out stuff before, so I have ideas in mind. And yeah, I've had several shoots, especially you're right, baseball players for some reason. There's always like, hey, you got 5 minutes to get these guys for a magazine shoot or whatever. And I've had several that way. I just try to be as nice as possible, and I go, hey, I'm just trying to here get this done for a magazine, and not play like it's me doing it all for myself. It's for so and so. It's for so and so. They want this done. Your team wants it done, and they're aware it's a necessary evil for some of them. Some of them love it, some of them hate it. Like you mentioned, there's some people who just hate photos, and to this day, there's a lot of people I know that hate photos that are athletes and they just want to get it over with. But some love it, and some eat it up. And especially nowadays with the age of social media, back to that again, it's kind of they're more adapt to do it than they were before, I think, and work with you.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it's kind of be flexible on the fly, and you can get what you can get.
Yeah.
And just be prepared to adapt. Don't let anything get you down. It's just you just have to make lemonade out of lemons sometimes. That's what it
Yeah.
is.
Something that I always get asked, and I'll get through social media, emails or DMs, etc., are the inevitable gear questions. And
Hmm.
so, and sometimes it's about brands and lenses and on and on. So I guess the closest that I'll get to that kind of question for you is to say, whether you're shooting basketball, baseball, football, your gear, I don't mean necessarily brands, etc., but in terms of focal lengths and these kind of things, what would you say are the lenses that tend to go with you regardless of what the sport is? And then what are the other lenses that you either swap in or swap out depending on the specific sport?
That's actually changed a lot for me in the last year or so with the invent of the Canon 100 to 300 2.8 lens, just because it's a lot lighter than just carrying around a 400 or a 600. To me, I love the flexibility of using a 1 to 3, and I can use it for basketball strictly 1 to 300, shoot 2.8, and I don't use my 7200 for that anymore because I've got the 100 300. That 30 millimeters is not going to mess with me. I mean, I'm fine with that. And for football, I'll put an extender on there, like a 1.4 color converter. And then, I'm shooting, what is it, 140 to 420. So that to me is fine. I don't have, and I'm shooting at 4. And these days with the ISOs on the cameras and being outside, it's not an issue. It's in fact, I can just have a wide angle and I can have that lens, and I'm covered for most sports. Now, granted, if I'm shooting soccer and I'm all the way to the end, then it might be a little reach. I might want my 600 there or something like that. But for most part, I want to say 80% now I'm using that 100 to 300 just for flexibility. Because before, sometimes you'd be too tight if you just have a 400 and they run a little closer to you and you cut off parts of their body. I hate doing that. I want to be able to zoom out and I can still shoot that at 2.8 or f4, like I said, if I'm at 140 or something, and it's just wonderful. So for most of the sports, that's been a game changer for me. And everyone I talked to or have used it has told me the same story. They're like, "Oh my gosh, this is a game changer." And I'm like, "Yes, it is." The fact it's so light and it's so sharp too. That's another thing. It's really quick to focus with my bodies. And people ask what camera bodies I'm using. I use R1s, Canon R1s, for the most part, and the R5 II for the portraits. So.
Yeah, I think it's been nice to, somewhat simplify what we carry. For those who are not familiar, for years, really up until now, there were the three lenses that they would call
Mhm.
like the Holy Trinity, the 2470, 7200, and generally the 400. And yes, cameras have gotten lighter as we've moved from the DSLRs to mirrorless. The lenses themselves have gotten lighter, but having the two camera strap on you and then having a monopod with another one, and then if it's football and you have to run to stay ahead of the play, or it's golf and you get to a point where you're just jangling as you're running down the court of the field.
And you said, and it's so funny because you look at these pictures, and now there's a lot of memes out there, people with a million cameras and whatnot. And I know a lot of folks that are older than us, that have been doing it for years in that 3, 4 camera system, and now they're just have medical bills like crazy. They're hurting all the time because it'll catch up to you. While you're young now, you guys in the 20s, and you think you can do everything. Trust me, it will catch up to you.
Yeah.
It's work smarter, not harder these days. And it's kind of like if I can get more out of less, then I'm going to do it, and not sacrifice any quality.
Well, and as you said, the cameras with the higher ISOs have gotten so good that there's not this fear of, oh, I can't go above 400 ISO. I mean
Right.
that's almost non-existent. I was in New York City and I was photographing a musical performance at a club, and I'm right there in the front row, and I can shoot it 1.4 or 1.8, and there people aren't
Mhm.
dancing super fast, they're just performing, but I'm at 3/20ths of a second at 1.4, and the ISO is low, and
Yeah,
it looks fantastic, and it's just as the technology improves, it makes it easier to take decent pictures. Now, I will say that because the technology has improved so much, it has become a lower barrier to entry
for
for
sure.
photographers. And so, you have the longer time photographers who I think sometimes kind of, gripe and begrudge, the younger photographers, and they've got it easier
Mhm.
than when I came up, and followed generally by a, hey, kids, get off my lawn, because that's what you'd say if you were the grumpy curmudgeon. But, I guess, and you touched on this early, if you have five photographers shooting the same event from the same position, maybe not shoot the same direction
Yeah.
as the other four photographers.
Yep.
And I find that, there's photographers that I know and that I'm friends with, and I'll see an image published in a newspaper, a magazine from an event that I shot also. And I know that so and so and I were in the same photo well for the same play. And I think, I did not see that happen. And it's just, and I'm sure, not to give myself, too much
Yeah,
credit,
no,
but I'm
I
sure there's
agree.
times people say the other way too. But it's
Sure.
just, you've got to have a unique perspective. It's not about everybody shooting the guy swinging the bat at the ball. Pretty much anybody can do that. It's about pre-visualization, anticipation, understanding the game, knowing where to be with your camera before the action even happens there. I mean, do you have any kind of other
Yeah, that's actually we kind of mentioned it before, but it's so important to differentiate yourself. Like you mentioned, if we're 5 in a row at the same spot, it might be a safe spot to be for what you perceive the play to come towards you or to happen. Well, I don't want to be in the same spot. If I can control where I can be. Now, sometimes you can't. Sometimes you have assigned spots and you can't. You're just stuck there. But if I can control that, there's no way in the world I want to be in the same spot as those other four photographers. I want to be somewhere else. Granted, if the play goes to them, I miss it and I get the wrong angle. But guess what? If it comes to me, they're all wrong and I'm right. You know what I mean? I'll get the shot and they won't. I want something different than everybody else, like you mentioned. I don't want to see the same photo over and over. And that happens a lot of times when you have playoffs and where you have assigned spots where we're all in the same spot and you'll see the same angle of the same play, even if it's a big play. So that and one other thing I want to talk about, you mentioned about especially with younger photographers, and it doesn't have to apply to younger. I think it could be anybody. But one thing I've noticed is like etiquette on sidelines. It's gotten a lot worse than it used to be. And I do want to stress that, and I stress it every time I speak, just because I think it's karma. Just be good to people next to you. Don't be rude. Don't step in people's way if you're in your way. And I'll tell you a funny story that happened last year. Is there was I think he was a student. I believe it was a student at a university, and it's near the end of the game. A big play is about to happen. I think it was a field goal to win the game or something. And this student walks right in front of me, and I'm already set, and I'm there, and he wouldn't move, and I just kind of like, gave him a little look and said, "Hey, do you mind moving over a little bit?" He gave me a little lip, a little attitude, and I was like, you know what, it's not worth it. I'm gonna scoot over, move, get my shot what I need. Well, then so the end of the play comes, and I guess something else has happened, like a kickoff or something. So I move down to the end zone, and I see him talking to a buddy of mine, and then they look over at me, and then I know exactly what happened. The buddy told them what I did and who I was and who I worked for, blah blah blah. And I get an email from this kid because I asked the guy, I was like, who is this that same guy? And the guy's like, yeah. He asked to see if he could be on my national championship CFP team. And I'm thinking to myself, the nerve of this guy. There is no way on earth he would ever be on that. Just all he had to do was apologize or say, hey, I'm sorry, my bad. That's it.
Sure.
Done. But no, he had to be a jerk about it. And, I think he'll come back to bite him, at least when it comes to me, and things like that. And my team, or if his name ever comes about in our circles, I'm sorry, but that's just be nice to people. It's not that hard, and I hope I'm that way. I hope I don't have attitude with people. Granted, we all have bad days, but I try to, at least make time. And a lot of people will come up and talk, and I'm happy to help and happy to talk. Granted, try not to do it in the middle of a huge play, going on where I'm concentrating. But, if it's like a timeout or something, feel free to ask me questions or come talk to me. I have no problem with that.
Well, it goes back to professionalism. And the thing is that photographer might have talent, but if you get them a credential to shoot the event and they act to others the way they acted to you, then as an entity, you could lose the right to get future credentials. So
Sure.
it's not just about being able to make a decent to really good photo. It's you're a representative of that entity who
Totally.
gets you the
Totally.
license.
Totally. And I
So
even tell my team at the college football playoff, I was like, guys, we represent the CFP, so if something doesn't go right, which, things don't always go right in every situation, we have protocols to handle it. We don't make a scene, we call so and so, we do this, we do that, but you never causing a scene and you let me know right away, and stuff like that. So we don't have any issues like that because that's a big deal.
yeah, there's a way to do it. So you mentioned that at some point you'd love to go on a safari and do
Yeah.
photography, and I'm sure that as people are listening, they're thinking, Kevin's shot the World Series and he shot all these really phenomenal events. Why would this guy hold a safari out as something he really wants to do? So
Well,
as a guy,
I have a funny story though
okay,
about this. Okay, so I've got back before I shot sports, I did, like I said, weddings and portraits. And so I got a triple master's degree from WPPI, which is Wedding and Portrait Photographers International, and a master's degree from PPA, which is Professional Photographers of America. And so I'd enter a lot of prints, right? And to get those degrees, you have to speak a little bit and you have to actually enter prints and, win awards and things like that. So I did that, and I had all these great portraits and great wedding images and, still lifes I think I've entered. And to this day, my highest scoring print was a photo of a lion, believe it or not. And everyone was like, man, where did he take that? Is it a safari somewhere? It was actually a zoo, the Fort Worth Zoo right here. And it cracks me up to this day. I was like, ah, oh. Yeah, I've always wanted to photograph wildlife, just for fun, obviously, and to make my own prints. I do all my own printing, a lot of it. And so it's a lot of fun for me to just do see my stuff come alive in prints. And so I thought it'd be kind of really cool to go on safari and get some really amazing images that way. So that's kind of what started for me.
Well, when you said the Lion, I thought, and I guess you don't mean the Detroit
Not the
Lions.
Detroit. I did photograph them, but not them.
Yeah, I
Yeah, I'll
will.
have to show you that photo one day.
No, I believe me. I'd love to see it. I can tell you that as a person who generally does not have a lot of patience, wildlife photography will teach you patience. I have sat in a vehicle getting eaten alive by bugs for 5 hours, waiting for a group of about 7 lions to wake up and climb down out of a tree on the hopes that they would jump on each other and play around and then go out to hunt. I've waited for sleeping African wild dogs to wake up to go hunt. And you hope that they wake up soon, and you hope that they wake up before the sun gets so low that it's too dark to make
Right.
meaningful photos. So, I mean, it is a waiting game and a
Yeah.
game of patience like none other. But I will tell you that when it clicks and it comes together, from my opinion, there is nothing like it.
Well, I can imagine. Well, one day, if I get the
Yeah.
time to do it, I definitely want to do it.
Yeah, I'm getting ready to head to Vietnam and then directly to Borneo from there to photograph the orange orangutans
Oh,
on the
wow.
Kinabalu River, which they have pygmy elephants and they have all sorts of monkeys and all sorts of of course snakes and everything else. And I have not shot in Borneo before, but it's funny because I'll be shooting Major League Baseball leading right up to when I
Right.
leave to do street photography in Vietnam and cultural photography and then wildlife in Borneo. So I think, for me, when I shoot things that are not sort of the day to day, it kind of re-energizes me.
Yeah, for sure. It's a
You know,
variety thing for me too.
yeah, yeah. I mean, you're using some of the same lenses, but you're using some different lenses. As an example, I'll be using a 105 macro lens when I go to
Hmm.
Borneo because you're going to see frogs as big as your fist that are crazy looking and multicolored
Oh yeah.
and but why would I use a macro lens for baseball or football, et
Right.
cetera? And yeah, so it's just yeah, I think anytime you can sprinkle in something, it really is just kind of energizing. Well, one thing that I'll kind of ask you, as we get towards closing is, what would be your advice to amateur photographers, and whether they've been shooting for a year or 5 or 6 years, is there a nugget or two that, whether it's broad or specific advice, that if put into action could really fundamentally improve their photography, take them a leap forward by just doing a thing or two, maybe different or more often than they do now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things. I think one thing would be to constantly push yourself to try different things, to be creative, and kind of look at your images after you create them to see why it didn't look good or why it looks great. Just kind of like, what I mentioned before, what I did when I first started. That'll never get old. I mean, that's something you can teach yourself and you'll learn that way. Another thing is just fill yourself with all the education you can. And these days, it's so easy. You can go on YouTube and find anything you can dream of is there, or Google, and just if you don't know how to do something, look it up and you can learn, like especially your camera settings. That's another thing. Know your camera settings. Get to learn it. Don't just stick it on P mode or automatic, or just learn to shoot manual. Because then you will learn how to solve any situation in any lighting and any place you find yourself. And so that'd be my biggest advice.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. Usually I'll talk about composition because
Mhm.
you'll see the picture of the grandchild playing baseball, and you think, well, did you want them to have the pole coming out of the middle of their head?
Right,
And if as the photographer you step 3 feet to your right, well, now it's just woods because they're playing like little league.
right.
It's just woods and it's just green, and it would have been such a nice picture, but like I said, now they have a telephone pole coming out of their head.
Yeah, that's a good point because sometimes I'll pick my spots based upon the background and wait for the action to come to me where
Hmm.
I have a decent background. And a lot of people don't do that. A lot of people are like, okay, well, I'm just here. Let me see what happens. And the background's as messy as I'll get out. And sometimes, you don't have a choice. Let's
Sure.
be honest. There's some fields and there's some places you go where the background is what it's going to be. And there's TV cameras nowadays, and it's just like they're all over the place where you can't do anything about it. But if you have a choice, try to find a nice clean background where any action that happens in that scene will look so much cleaner and nicer.
Yeah, yeah, no doubt. Well, I know that listeners are going to want to check out your work and see all these different things that you have going on. I know you mentioned it early, but if you could maybe just reiterate where people can find you on social media so they can follow you or check out what you're doing.
Yeah, it's just at Kevin Jairaj at both Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. Everything is just at Kevin Jairaj, first name, last name.
Great,
Easy.
great. Well, Kevin, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time. I mean, I knew this was going to be a fun conversation, and it was every bit that, if not more. So I just want to say thank you for joining me for this episode.
Well, thanks, Mitch. I really enjoyed being with you.
Yeah, no, this was great. I want to remind everybody that we publish on the 1st and 15th of every month. Maybe subscribe and like and comment and do all those things that help us get the word out and continue to grow the podcast. We are coming up on episode 50 before too long, which I think is great, and we certainly appreciate all of the support from the photography community all over the world who've come to the various servers, whether it's Apple or Amazon or Google or Spotify or any of the other ones that we're on. So really appreciate the listenership. Feel free to keep the DMs and emails coming to me. I will always get back with you on answers to your questions. You can reach me on Instagram. I'm Mitch Stringer Images. And of course, you can go to mitchstringerimages.com online. I would say Instagram's probably the best place to get the most updated photography that I do and get a quick response from me. And so with that said, until the next episode, I wish you great light. I wish you great shooting. We'll talk again soon.